This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're going to look at the Sony VAIO Pro 13. This is the 13-inch model, that's why it's called 13. There is also an 11-inch model, pretty much the same other than the size difference. What's exciting about this? Well, it's incredibly thin, it's incredibly light, which we come to expect from Sony. It's also one of the first Ultrabooks running on the new Intel 4th generation Haswell CPU. That's right, we got Haswell inside. Better battery life, perhaps better graphics performance. We'll see about that in our review, and we're going to look at it now. So this is the Sony VAIO Pro, one of the first Haswell Ultrabooks that you can buy, and as you can see, crazy slim, right? Also incredibly light. Right now, these are the lightest Ultrabooks on the market. The 13-inch weighs 2.34 pounds. That's even lighter than the Samsung Series 9, now called the AtiveBook 9, which was one light laptop. The 11-inch version of this guy weighs under 2 pounds, so crazy. 0.68 inches thick, very, very thin. Sony's usual kind of angular design, I think it's very attractive, kind of understated. All sorts of little design elements going on. There's a little bit of gloss over here, for example. Kind of resists the fingerprints a bit. Looks good. There's tapering on the sides, so that makes it look even thinner than it is. But, I mean, gosh, it is thin. Here's our vent right here, and that's where we plug in our AC adapter, compact AC adapter there. And same design element we've seen on things like the Sony VAIO Z, the latest generation that we reviewed. We've got this little metal end cap here and little feet that stick out to prop up the notebook when you have it open all the way. Also, an interesting use of angles, so it's not just a boring rectangle right there. On this side here, we have two USB 3.0 ports. We have a full-size HDMI port, which for something this skinny is pretty good accomplishment. 3.5mm combo headphone jack, and this is our SD card slot. I know some of you hate it when the SD card sticks out. As you can see, I have a card in here right now, and it is not sticking halfway out of the notebook like it does on some other Ultrabooks, so that's always very nice. Primarily, this is available with a touchscreen, and on the touchscreen models, you get the carbon fiber black as one color option, and there's a silver option. Personally, I think the black looks really cool, and you're going to get better contrast on the keyboard keys, but you can see the striation, the carbon fiber finish. It looks pretty nice. Now, I've reviewed and owned several other Sony laptops, the Sony VAIO S 13.3, for example, the Sony VAIO Z. Same finish. I find it pretty durable. I'm fairly careful with my gear. You know, if you slam the thing around, you might be able to scratch the carbon fiber, but it's pretty durable. It does pick up fingerprint oil. You can use a damp cloth to remove that, but keep that in mind. Usual VAIO logo here, and for something a little bit different on the back side, we have, you can barely see it, but there it is, a VAIO logo, again on the bottom. And what's this little doodad for? Right here, you pull off this little rubber door and there's a connector for the optional sheet battery. That's $150, which is typical for Sony. Their sheet batteries always seem to be $150, and they always seem to double run times, which in fact, that's what it's supposed to do again. Doubles the capacity of your battery. If you notice here, there's no visible screws anywhere. It's a mystery right now how to open this. If you take off this little rubber piece right here, there's one Phillips head screw. I suspect that you actually lift up the keyboard deck to access the internals. Sony really doesn't intend for this to be user upgradable in any way, so you should order it with the parts that you want. The visual line around here, this is just visual. This is actually not a seam over here. It ends just before the rubber foot, for example. So, a little bit mysterious. Anyway, we have a whole rubber line all across the top here to stop it from skidding on the table. Two rubber feet over here. And this is carbon fiber. Those of you who like Sony notebooks, are familiar, have watched our video reviews of other notebooks, know carbon fiber flexes. This is by design. Some people, it bugs the heck out of them, but other folks are okay with it. The idea with carbon fiber is that it absorbs impact. It doesn't dent like metal Ultrabooks will, and it can twist a little bit. I mean, when this is closed, actually it's very rigid, but there's some flexibility here, so it's designed to kind of give without breaking, sort of like your cell phone with the plastic battery door, that it's designed to absorb impact instead of just cracking to pieces. But you know who you are. Do you really want that kind of metal thing that the Samsung Series 9 Ultra has, the MacBook Air, or the Asus ZenBook Prime line? Well, that might be for you in that case, and not something made of carbon fiber with its inherent intentional flexibility. For example, if I grab the display panel, I can move it a little bit like that, you see? I mean, I'm trying to do that, but you can do that. It's not going to harm it. I mean, I'm not saying you should grab it and snap it, obviously, duh. But it's designed to be able to move like that. As we do open up, you can see what the insides look like, and you can see this is a glossy touchscreen. Here we have reflections, par for the course. When you have a touchscreen, you always get a glossy display right now. But here's our keyboard deck, and the keyboard is actually quite good. I like this better than the keyboard on the Sony VAIO Z latest generation. A little bit more tactile, a little bit more feel. Backlit keyboard, you can adjust the backlight level yourself if you want, but this has an ambient light sensor that generally handles it in a good way. Nice and roomy, 13 inches, 13.3, you got enough room for that. Large oversized trackpad, a little contrast here. We have the carbon fiber dark look over here, and then a kind of matte surface, which is nice, so you don't get your sweaty palms on here and slide all over the place. Keys are a little bit shiny. Again, this stuff will show fingerprint oil. A damp rag will take care of that. And we have our FN row here combined with multimedia as you would expect up top, and you do have to hit the FN key to activate those multimedia functions and brightness, volume, all that kind of stuff. Got the power button over here on this corner, lights up green, typical Sony, nice looking right there. And we have the assist button right there if you need help, if you need to refresh the PC, get driver updates, all that kind of stuff. One nice thing about the power button design that Sony always does is it glows both on the top and on the side, so when the notebook's closed you can see your charging status. For example, if it's amber when it's charging, it's going to go to green when it's fully charged, and it will be off if the computer is off. The oversized trackpad has a kind of matte finish to it, which I actually like quite a lot. It works fairly reliably. It handles multi-touch fine. Once in a while I notice it just doesn't register a tap, and well, now it's doing it just fine, isn't it? But once in a while I had a problem with that. Surely a driver update could fix that if it's a problem. One thing about the notebook being so thin that when I press the buttonless trackpad, which really does move, you can feel it on the underside if you put your hand underneath. Because if you take a look at the design, here we have the rubber feet, or rubber ridge really, that separates it, but it's that thin on the side that it's a little bit freaky. Now, most of us probably don't put our hand underneath at the same time, but you will feel it pushing through a little bit. Wow, that's skinny. And for those of you who are wondering what the backlight looks like in the keyboard, we're in a fairly dark room, and you can see pleasant white rings around the keys. The letters themselves light up. Works pretty well. Now when it's open, there it is, waifishly thin looking. This is amazing how thin this touchscreen lid is here. When I reviewed the Samsung Series 9 and the Samsung Series 7 Ultra, now called the ATIV 9 and the ATIV 7, I was saying that you're not going to get a touchscreen on something this thin until Sony does it. And in fact, here it is. They've done that. Touchscreens are inherently thicker. They usually have extra layers on top to handle that touch, but Sony is so good at miniaturizing, that's what they're known for, and finding a way to fit things into small places, that undoubtedly they got together with the folks who make Xperia products and said, how can we make this as skinny as possible? So finally we have something that is this thin and this light and has a touchscreen as well. As you can see, the way the hinge is designed down here at the bottom, the edge of the display actually props it up, just like that. It looks kind of cool too, doesn't it? So it gives a little bit of ventilation underneath. We do have some vents down there besides the one going on over here. Their intake on the bottom, exhaust on the side, and it can get warm. Now I know you might have seen some early reviews that said this thing gets blazingly hot on the bottom. Well, if you're taxing it hard, or if you're doing something like playing Civ 5, which I admit to have been doing on this, not that Ultrabooks are really intended for games, you can get pretty hot. It will exceed human body temperature, which is when it starts to feel kind of hot to you. We have never gone above 100 degrees, but actual normal use, including streaming YouTube video, watching Netflix for an hour, fan is quite quiet and it doesn't get all that hot. One thing that happens though, for folks who did some reviews and they had to rush to do it, is when you first get this machine, there are 39 Windows updates to install, then about 25 application updates. That really gets the machine working hard, and the fan is going to roar while it does that, and it's going to get hot. But once you're done with all that stuff and the Windows indexing services are finished indexing everything on the hard drive, it's a very different machine, a lot quieter, a lot cooler. Doesn't mean you'll never hear the fan. You will hear it, like I said, if you're playing games. Or, interesting thing, when I was streaming Amazon Prime Instant Video on this guy, you have your option of doing it the traditional YouTube way in the browser, and that worked just fine. Or you can go with Silverlight, which is a Microsoft plugin, and it prompted me to try Silverlight. Not only did I see the video not look so good, but boy, did it get the fan roaring, and it used up a lot more battery. So it also depends on what you're doing when the machine runs hot. So anyway, for you Amazon Prime Instant Video folks, avoid that Silverlight plugin, just from my experience. Stick with YouTube, with Adobe Flash for your streaming right now. Much, much quieter, much cooler. Adobe Flash streaming on this, I was able to watch 2 hours of Amazon Prime, and it used up about 20% of my battery, so that's quite good. Same thing with Netflix, about 10 to 15% per hour. drain on this. And that's with the brightness set at about 65% or so, and the ambient light sensor on, which is handled a little bit differently here. Usually in your charms menu, you'll see in general settings, controls for the auto brightness. See, it just kicked on now because I put my hand in front of the sensor, which is up here next to the webcam. There is no option for that here. It's all handled by Sony's own software. They have their own Sony control panel. You can turn that on and off. I find that it generally works well. It's not like Samsung that kind of makes you a little crazy because it's so twitchy and makes everything too dark. So I've left it on, but you can disable it if you want to get maximum brightness. This display panel is at about 240 nits of brightness, which is okay. It's fine. It's not super duper bright though. So I do tend to run it at 50% or higher compared to something like, say, the Asus ZenBook Prime models that are usually 300 to 350 nits of brightness. And wow, they're really bright, so I tend to keep it turned down low. This is a full HD IPS panel here, really lovely quality, very nice color saturation. There are 3 color saturation settings you can choose from. By default, it's on Vivid, and also by default for the desktop, it goes with 125% scaling to make icons and text a little bit bigger. Of course, you can change that as you see fit. Very good viewing angles, as I said, very good color saturation. Nice black levels on this. In the really inky black parts of a movie scene, sometimes I would say I'd like to maybe see a little bit more detail sometimes, but overall it's a very kind of cinematic, I'm watching a movie in a theater kind of experience. And Sony uses what they call their tri-luminous display on this. You know, Sony has names for all of their TV technology they bring over, like we see Bravia in the Xperia phones, for example. Whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, it looks really, really nice. The touchscreen supports 10-point multi-touch, and not that you're often using 10 fingers, but boy, if you're getting together for a group finger painting, I suppose that's really awesome. So how about pricing? This kind of has what everybody's been asking for. Ultra thin, ultra light, put Haswell in there, give us a touchscreen, but we don't want it to be any thicker or any heavier. So it's going to cost you something, especially with the fancy carbon fiber chassis and all this kind of thing. So this guy, the 13-inch model, starts out at $1249 instead of the usual Ultrabook $999 starting price point. Sony has their VAIO T line for the more affordable Ultrabooks. You don't get the full HD display and other things like that. So again, this is their fancy high-end model here. For $1249, you get a Core i5 Haswell. That's the 4200U clocked at 1.6 gigahertz with Intel HD 4400 integrated graphics, a 128 gig SSD drive, and that's the new PCIe SSD drive. It's very, very fast. I'll show you our Crystal disk mark benchmarks on this guy. It's super fast. You get 4 gigs of RAM for that price, and all models have dual-band Intel Wi-Fi with WiDi, Bluetooth 4.0, and NFC. And intelligently, they put the NFC right at the trackpad, a place we're used to interacting with. It's easily accessible, not on the back, not on the bottom, not someplace weird. So if you do want to use NFC, it doesn't have to be just with the Sony branded product. Rest it right on the trackpad, tap it on there to get going with NFC. We have a webcam up here, 720p with an Exmor R sensor. It's fine, it's okay, it's not exceptional, it's not terrible, it's run-of-the-mill average. For those of you who want better stuff inside, you can get this with 8 gigs of RAM. That's about a $100 upcharge if you're ordering it from Sony. Just like with the VAIO Z and other models, you can pretty much order any way you want. You can get a 256 or even a 512 gig SSD. Those are the most expensive upgrades. Sony's charging a lot for those. Say for $14.99, you can get yourself the Core i7 1.8 gigahertz. That's the i7-4500U, also with Intel HD 4400, and 8 gigs of RAM for $14.99. If you spend $17.99, you can get a 256 gig SSD, the 8 gigs of RAM, and the Core i7 CPU. A lot of mix and match going on. This is not available with Intel HD 5000 graphics, unlike the Sony VAIO Duo 13 that's going to be coming out in July. Not an option for this. I suspect because this is all about being ultra thin, ultra light, that there's not much room here for heat dissipation, and there's not much room for a battery, so they didn't really want to go a little gung-ho on that. So look at the Duo 13 if you want that, and that's an interesting convertible slider form factor with an HD display. Speaking of heat and battery life and all things related, like other Sony models, this has 3 fan settings. So if you need it to be ultra quiet, you can set it to be ultra quiet. If you want it to run like a gangbuster, you can set it to that, or you can just leave it on the normal balance mode, which is where we have it on now for cooling. One thing I actually like about the Sony is if you plug it into power, it's going to run at max possible speed unless you tell it not to do that. And there's like no throttling going on. Nice. A lot of Ultrabooks, even when they're plugged in, they throttle a lot because of heat issues, that kind of thing. So it's pretty hard to get maximum performance out of them for more than about 5 minutes. This guy will blow the fan like a banshee if you want to actually make it do something incredibly taxing, like exporting full HD video, again playing Civ 5 or something like that with it. So it's fairly versatile in that respect, but when you unplug it, it's a silent, cool little runner. When it comes to software, you can see we have a lot of stuff on here, and not so much of it that I put on. Sony has mostly what are shortcuts over here. Like you got your Slacker radio, iHeartRadio, a bunch of things like that, and you can just remove those live tiles and uninstall them if you want. Most of them are web shortcuts. They do include ArtRage, which is a great art program that works wonderfully with active digitizers that have digital pens. They've been putting it on the Duo line. They had on the Duo 11. It will be on the Duo 13. I'm a little confused as to why it's on this, because this is touchscreen only. You can fingerprint to your heart's content, or use a capacitive stylus, the same kind you'd use for an iPad or an Xperia tablet, that kind of thing, but no active digital pen here. Usually you won't see that in something that is just a traditional notebook form factor like this guy, because it's not very ergonomic to try to draw and write like that. That's more appropriate to tablets and convertibles. You have your usual Office 2010-2013 trial, 1 month on here, and a bunch of VAIO utilities, VAIO Care, all that stuff to help maintain the computer. Nothing too terribly intrusive on here. So for those of you who are just dying to know how Haswell's doing, let's take a look at first our Windows Experience Index, and then I'll throw a whole lot of benchmark numbers at you and show you our crystal disk mark. So for our processor, we have 6.9. For our memory, we have 5.9. This seems to be single channel configuration. Again, the memory is soldered on the motherboard. It looks like it's interfacing it as one 4 gig stick if you have the 4 gig model like we do here. We have the Core i5 again, by the way, not the Core i7. Our desktop graphics is 5.6, our gaming graphics is 6.2, and our hard disk, because it is so wickedly fast, is 8.4. Usually a pretty good SSD shows is 8.1, so that's nice. So as you can see, at least in terms of our Windows Experience Index, Haswell was supposed to be this awesome leap forward for graphics performance. Not so much, honestly, and I had a feeling it was going to be that way with Ultrabooks. Intel HD 4400 graphics are maybe at best 10% faster than HD 4000 graphics. Where you might see those serious performance gains is in the HD 5000 and really some of the even higher level solutions that are meant for desktops and some larger notebooks. So yeah, you're not going to be playing Crysis on this guy still. It's pretty much the same old stuff when it comes to Ultrabooks and gaming. You can play Skyrim on low settings and a lower resolution on this. You can play Civ 5 at full HD and it runs just fine. That's really more computationally intensive than visually intensive, to be honest, but it's not a gaming machine. Where Haswell does help is with battery life. This does not have an immense battery inside. This has a 4750 milliamp battery inside, which is actually a little bit smaller than the 5000 milliamp battery that we had in our Asus Transformer Book TX300 Transformer tablet 13.3 inch machine that we reviewed. Yet this guy runs longer. That's because Haswell is good for battery life. The CPU and GPU together really don't use all that much power. So far, Sony said about 6.5 hours, and for a change, well, they really weren't wildly overestimating. Doing productivity and office kinds of things, surfing the web, averaging about 6 hours of use. And we already told you how we're doing with streaming video playback. Not too bad at all. So yes, it's not a 10-hour battery life, but given how thin and light this is and that there isn't much of a battery inside this, that's quite good. And for those of you who do need to double your run times, again, there's that sheet battery that's optional that clips on the bottom. Makes it a little bit heavier, a little bit thicker, but you're starting with such a small, light product that it's still certainly not a burden. Now for our SSD speed, you can see right here what we did on Crystal Disk Mark, and this number is about twice what we normally see on even the fastest SSDs that use the mSATA interface, so very good. All the other numbers are really healthy and high. Also, this one, particularly high. Really, really fast storage. Can you tell the difference in everyday use? It depends on how much time you spend writing to the disk and generating temp files, say if you're editing HD video or something like that. But suffice to say, it will never be the bottleneck. It's really, really fast. When it comes to other benchmarks, on 3D Mark 11, it scored a P636, which is around what we see for actually third generation Ivy Bridge systems. Some of them are in the mid 550s, so a little bit better there. Again, not a true gaming machine. For a PC Mark 7, it scored a 4549, which puts it in league with some of the top Ultrabooks that are already on the market. Again, not wickedly higher. Haswell really isn't so much about huge performance improvements. It is really about the battery life when it comes to Ultrabooks. On Geekbench, too, it scored a very respectable 7,666. That's not going to beat the old VAIO Z3, the latest generation VAIO Z that we had before. Sadly, Sony discontinued it. Because that guy scored closer to 20,000. So you get the idea. But that had a quad-core i7 full mobile CPU in it. That was really a special machine and a different kind of machine than an Ultrabook is. That said, no, this may be a VAIO Pro. It is no Z3, but that doesn't mean that this is a wimpy, useless machine. For most folks, an Ultrabook with a Core i5 or Core i7 has more than enough processing power to do everything you need. Web, photo editing, some HD video editing, social networking, all that kind of stuff. You people who actually needed that full mobile CPU in a light package, you know who you are and you know what you're using it for. And that is serious number crunching with huge Excel spreadsheets, software development with heavy-duty IDEs, virtual machines up the wazoo, that kind of stuff. So chances are you know if you need something that's stronger because you're already using something that's pretty darn powerful, and you'll know whether this is the right machine for you or not. But for most of us in the world, this is just fine. Web development, perfectly sufficient. And man, who can beat this size and this weight, you know? I mean, given everything that it can do. So that's the appeal of this. That's the selling point of this. That's what you're paying your $1249 or higher for. Pretty darn good power. First Haswell CPU in here, extremely thin and light, attractive carbon fiber, pretty robust despite the fact that there is inherent design flexibility in the chassis here. Lovely full HD display. Oh, so nice. Good touch. Good experience. So here's the compact charger. We don't usually spend a lot of time talking about chargers, but when something is this light, it becomes relevant. So it's certainly compact enough, but the interesting thing about it is right over here, it has a USB port right here, full size, regular USB port, so you can charge your smartphone or your tablet or what have you at the same time. Pretty handy to have. Don't have to run and look for another outlet, especially if you're at the hotel room and you discover there's usually only 2 working outlets within the range of your table anyway. So let's take a look at how good this screen actually looks and listen to the speakers, because here's a treat. You know how Sony notebooks, at least the smaller ones, tend to have really quiet audio? This one can get quite loud. When you go all the way up to about 70% or so, it sounds like your average 13-inch Ultrabook, not super duper loud, but the last 20% or so in volume, my God, it gets really loud. It sounds pretty full too. Sony has some audio magic that they work on there that helps things sound good, but in general, pretty darn loud. We're at 70 and we're going to go up. And suddenly, wow.
Will be every man for himself.
Looks great. Sounds pretty good.
We get ready.
So definitely a big improvement over the Sony VAIO Z and the Sony VAIO S 13.3-inch in terms of sound quality and sound volume. Granted, it's not rich and full like it would be on a 17-inch gaming notebook, but it's not bad at all. And since this is Windows 8, you get the Metro web browser that we're looking at right now that runs in full screen mode. And despite the fact that this is 1080p, it keeps the text pretty readably large. So that works well. And again, on the desktop side, it's set to 125% scaling for the desktop UI and for the web browser, and that keeps things pretty readable too. Being full Windows 8 64-bit, you can get this with 64-bit regular or Pro Edition. You can put Chrome on here, Firefox, any web browser that you want. Photoshop, you name it, all those good things, it can handle it. So that's the Sony VAIO Pro 13. It's available now, just starting to appear in Sony stores and in a couple of other retailers. I'm sure it'll be everywhere pretty soon. Obviously, thin, light, gorgeous-looking machine. You're going to pay a premium for the thinness, for the lightness, for getting Haswell early on, and for getting a touchscreen in something this small. Is it worth it? Only you know, because you know what you want. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Visit our website for the full review of the Sony VAIO Pro, and don't forget to hit that like button.